60,000 in Australia. They're the Jehovah's Witnesses, and some of you will find them on your doorstep today, devoutly preaching their message and pressing their literature. But this morning you're going to meet some other witnesses with a very different message. They're victims of child abuse at the hands of Jehovah's Witnesses, and they accuse the church of not only covering up their complaints, but actively frustrating police investigations. For years, a curtain of silence and obstruction has protected pedophiles within the ranks of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now that curtain has been drawn aside by the victims and by former elders, whose testimony implicates yet another church in this growing scandal. Our cover story is reported by Graham Davis.
At the Melbourne Tennis Centre, the gods of sport make way for the real thing, as 10,000 voices praise the Almighty. These are just some of the 60,000 or so Australians who belong to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, better known as the Jehovah's Witnesses.
We need to be zealous as proclaimers of God's kingdom, shining as illuminators of the world.
They're the clean-cut evangelists who appear at our doors, preaching Armageddon and the paradise to come for true believers.
Call back on everyone who shows even the slightest interest, even if we've just left them with a tract.
Yet as we'll see, the shepherds, as church leaders portray themselves, have created a hell on earth for some of the most vulnerable of their flock. And they're outlaws in the classic sense, having placed themselves outside the laws that protect children from sexual predators.
When it finally dawned on you that what you were witnessing was a policy of covering up child abuse, how did you feel about them?
Devastated, disappointed, angry.
Today, victims like Natalie Webb speak out for the first time, accusing the church of covering up the crimes against them. She was abused by her own father, Victor, an outwardly respectable member of the Bentley congregation in suburban Melbourne.
My earliest memory is having a bath with my father, and he was touching me, and from other things around me, I realised that I would have been about 4.
4 years old?
4, yeah.
And how long did the abuse go on for?
Till I was just turned 17.
17?
Mm-hmm.
And presumably it progressed from...
just touching to intercourse, penetration.
Natalie lived with her terrible secret until she was married, her father beaming like any other on her wedding day. Then, unable to bear it any longer, she told her story to this church elder, Maurice Hadley.
Was there any suggestion whatsoever that the police be informed?
None at all. The opposite, actually. Maurice said to me that the authorities shouldn't be notified because it would be a bad witness, and that they would be able to handle the situation.
So Maurice Hadley told you quite specifically not to go to the police?
Yes, and no psychiatrist or psychologist either for me, because I was having difficulties.
Why did he ban psychiatrists or psychologists from seeing you?
Because they're worldly and they are possibly satanic and could fill my head with rubbish.
Incredibly, Natalie's story is the norm, not the exception, for child abuse victims in the Jehovah's Witnesses. Simon Thomas was 12 when he fell prey to this man, Robert Souter, of the Corrimal congregation on the New South Wales South Coast. Even when Souter admitted his crimes to church elders, he was allowed to continue as a Jehovah's Witness. He also continued to molest other children.
Was there any suggestion that anybody go to the police over this?
No, none at all. My parents spoke to elders locally. They spoke to travelling overseers, and they were told that they shouldn't go to the police, and the best thing to do would be to keep the congregation clean, not say anything, pray more, and leave it to Jehovah.
How can you keep the congregation clean by keeping quiet and covering up something like this, when the person who's unclean is allowed back in?
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
Today, some disturbing answers. Clear evidence that the Watchtower Society routinely tries to pervert the course of justice in child abuse cases by obstructing police investigations.
Well, this is my copy of Elder's book, and these are my handwritten notes taken down at the dictation from the circuit overseer.
Jim Donald is a former church elder, now blowing the whistle on his fellow brothers, with details of an edict so sensitive it was never committed to paper.
This was a letter to all bodies of elders.
And it says here, child abuse confidential. What is it telling us there?
It's saying to us here, if interviewed by social workers or police or other authorities, do not reveal if a confession has been made. Contact society immediately.
So if a child abuser has said, yes, I did it,
yes,
you're not to tell the police that?
No, not at all.
Do you think that's obstruction?
Obviously. Obviously.
Jim Donald is a justice of the peace who once spread Jehovah's word as a church elder in the northern New South Wales town of Glen Innes. Now he confines himself to spreading news of worldly matters on his paper round, having abandoned the church 4 years ago.
We were to resist every approach by the authorities to willingly give over any information.
And you knew, did you, that that was the agenda, that you were not to cooperate?
Absolutely. You see, every instance like that is to be seen as an attack against pure worship and against Jehovah's name. And so what they call theocratic warfare is to take place.
Theocratic warfare?
Yes.
What does that mean?
That means we are in a battle situation.
With the police and the state?
With the state.
They have a phrase they refer to which is theocratic warfare, and that is basically that it's acceptable to lie or to cover over things if it's for the good of God's purpose.
Andy Farrell left the Jehovah's Witnesses 5 years ago after a lifetime's association.
They won't condone breaking the law where it's a more black and white issue, say it was a murder case or something like that. But there are certainly a lot of problems of a lesser scale that the church tries to deal with internally that probably belong in a court of law.
Child abuse.
Yeah, exactly.
You've written here search warrants and subpoenas. Now, what did they tell you?
They may make a forced entry into the hall. So we were encouraged to stand in front of the door and not to willingly open the door for them.
Officially, the church denies all knowledge of the concept of theocratic warfare. But Jim Donald's account of the verbal instruction not to cooperate with police was confirmed to Sunday by another former elder, though he wouldn't be filmed.
There's nothing on paper, right?
No.
Nothing on paper at all?
No.
Do you think this is because their legal department would have known they might have a problem with this in the future?
I think so, yeah.
Because they've got a big problem with this, haven't they?
Absolutely, yes.
And the man who was once the Society's own lawyer agrees.
I think it could have the practical effect of perverting the course of justice.
It could.
It could have that practical effect.
Let's commence our service by singing together our first hymn, number 673, There is a Redeemer.
The Reverend Warren Stuckey has left behind the law and the Jehovah's Witnesses to become an Anglican priest. It was a short journey physically, for his church is a stone's throw from the Watchtower's Sydney headquarters. But in personal and theological terms, his was a momentous defection, and as a former elder and director of Watchtower companies, he's a potent witness against his former associates.
I could imagine that if it was a case of any other crime like murder or something, that there would be full cooperation. And why, in this case, there is not, suggests that there is something that they're protecting.
Protecting the church's reputation, or even protecting child abusers, perhaps.
Or particular child abusers.
The Jehovah's Witnesses, in fact, routinely shield pedophiles from the law, as in the case of Robert Souter, allowing them to offend again and again.
It's been called a pedophile paradise. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Would you agree with it?
Yes.
You would?
Yeah.